I got home late Thursday night after a double shift at the hospital. I'm a trauma nurse, and I was running on fumes and cold coffee. All I wanted was to pull into my designated spot, crawl into bed, and forget the world existed until noon. But when I turned into my driveway, my headlights lit up a shiny silver Lexus parked square in my spot. I blinked. No mistake. That was my number painted right there on the curb. And the Lexus. It had a bright pink HOA board member decal slapped on the windshield like a badge of entitlement. I parked down the street, walked up to the car, and saw the license plate. Yep, it was Brenda Lotz. Brenda, the queen of our HOA, the woman who once fined me for leaving my garden hose coiled the wrong way. She ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom, complete with threats, bogus fees, and community-wide newsletters with her face on the front like she was running for office. I knocked on her door. Nothing. Lights off. She was ignoring me. Next morning, I called the HOA office. Brenda answered. "Hi, this is Elliot Foster. Someone's parked in my, I know, Elliot," she cut in. "That's my car. I had a plumbing emergency and your spot was the closest. I'll move it when I can, when you can," I said. "You've got a 4-car driveway." "And I'm the HOA president," she replied, like that explained everything. "You're being hostile. I don't appreciate your tone." She hung up. I couldn't believe it. I walked outside in my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and adrenaline, and stared at her Lexus like it had personally insulted me. I could have towed it, but I knew how Brenda operated. She'd twist it into harassment and fine me for the tow truck dripping oil on the pavement. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called in a favor from my buddy Owen, a mason who owed me for stitching up his hand last winter. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, we had a pallet of stone, 3 bags of cement, and a plan. The next morning, Brenda's Lexus was still there. By noon Saturday, there was a perfectly built stone wall 2 feet thick, 3 feet high, neatly surrounding her car on all 4 sides. Not touching it, just containing it. Like a very fancy prison, I even left a little opening wide enough for a raccoon, but definitely not a Lexus. I stood back, brushed the cement dust off my hands, and admired our work. Owen clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You seriously doing this? She wants to play HOA queen," I said. "I'll treat her car like royalty, give it its own castle." Then I packed my bag, grabbed my fishing gear, and drove 3 hours north to my cousin's cabin for the weekend. No phone, no signal, just silence and trout. I didn't return until Monday afternoon, and when I pulled into my driveway, my spot was empty. But the chaos across the street was just getting started. When I stepped out of my truck Monday afternoon, my neighbor across the street, Louis, was leaning on his porch, railing with a pair of binoculars and a bag of popcorn. He didn't even turn his head. "You missed the show," he said, tossing a kernel into his mouth. "She called a tow truck." Poor guy nearly had a stroke trying to figure out how to get it out. I looked to where the wall had been. The stones were stacked neatly on Brenda's lawn now, each one labeled with pink tape numbering them like evidence in a crime scene. Her Lexus was gone, but the grass beneath it looked like it had been through a battlefield. There were deep gouges in the turf and tire tracks that curved wildly like someone had tried to drag the car out sideways. A broken section of her front walkway was roped off with orange cones. Louis lowered the binoculars. She also tried to blame the wall on raccoons, said they were organized. That got a laugh out of me, but I knew Brenda wouldn't just let it go, not her style. Sure enough, halfway through unpacking my truck, a uniformed officer pulled up and walked up my driveway. Officer Rhodes. I'd stitched his nephew's head after a bike accident last summer. "Elliot," he said, looking more amused than stern. "We got a report of vandalism. Got time to talk, you bet," I said, waving him toward the porch. "Lemme guess, Brenda," he nodded. "She says you blocked in her vehicle without her consent, damaged her property, and violated HOA landscaping codes." "Her car was on my deeded property," I said. "She admitted it over the phone. I recorded the call." He raised an eyebrow. "You recorded it. State law says one-party consent," I said. "She told me she parked there, said she'd move it when she could, never did." Rhodes took out his notepad. "You have that recording handy?" I handed over my phone. He listened, chuckled once, then nodded. "Well," he said, "I'll file this as a civil dispute. No criminal charges, but you might want to prepare for some HOA drama. Wouldn't be the first time, I said, but it was worse than drama. By Tuesday morning, I got a notice taped to my door. Not mailed, taped. It was a printed letter on official HOA letterhead, with Brenda's signature scrawled at the bottom like a royal decree. The notice accused me of unauthorized hardscaping, obstruction of community access, and creating a hostile neighborhood environment. The fine, $650. I laughed at the number and called my lawyer, Nadia. She and I had gone to nursing school together before she switched to law, and she'd helped me before when the HOA tried to get me to repaint my door a less aggressive shade of blue. After I forwarded the notice and the phone recording to her, she called me back 5 minutes later. "This is textbook retaliation," she said. "They're trying to fine you for blocking your own driveway. That's not enforceable. Can we hit them back?" I asked. "Oh, I plan to," she said, "but I'll need the HOA bylaws, the full set. Not the summary they hand out to new residents." I knew where to get them. That night, I dropped by Walter's place. He was the oldest resident on the block, a retired postal inspector with a walking stick that doubled as a metal detector. "Brenda again?" he asked, ushering me inside. "She's escalating." Walter pulled out a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "These are the original HOA bylaws from when the development was built. I've got every revision, every amendment. Even the ones they tried to sneak through without votes." I flipped through the pages, and one clause jumped out at me. Section C-12. All board members are subject to conflict of interest provisions and may not use personal authority to access or benefit from deeded private property. "Bingo," I said. Walter tapped a page farther down. "Check this. Any board-imposed fine exceeding $200 must be approved by a vote of the full HOA board, and that meeting has to be recorded." "You think she got a vote?" Walter leaned back and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. "Brenda doesn't even let the rest of the board speak at meetings. She's got them cowed like church mice." I left with copies of the documents and handed them off to Nadia the next morning. By Wednesday, the chessboard was set. Nadia drafted a cease and desist letter pointing out the conflict of interest violation, the lack of board vote, and the misuse of HOA authority for personal vendettas. She sent it certified mail to Brenda and CC'd the County Housing Commission, but Brenda didn't back down. She didn't even blink. Instead, she doubled the fine. Now it was $1,300, and she added a new charge: emotional distress inflicted on a board member. That was the moment I decided it was time to go public. I made a video, just me in front of my house, calmly explaining what happened. I laid it out with dates, screenshots of the texts Brenda had sent me threatening escalation, and clips from the recorded phone call. I even included a time-lapse security video showing her parking in my spot and never returning to move it. I uploaded it to the community's private Facebook group and went to work. By the time I got off my shift, the video had over 3,000 views and 150 comments. People were furious, but not at me. Turns out Brenda had a habit of pulling stunts like this. One neighbor said she'd been fined for overly festive wreaths. Another claimed Brenda tried to ban wind chimes because they were psychologically disruptive. Someone else found out she'd been using HOA funds to pay her nephew to mow the community lawn, a lawn that didn't exist. Thursday morning, a group of residents stood outside the community clubhouse holding homemade signs. "Stop the HOA tyranny. My driveway, my rules." And "Who appointed Queen Brenda?" Brenda came out, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I approached with Nadia, who had a file folder in one hand and a copy of the bylaws in the other. Brenda tried to speak, but Nadia raised a hand. "We're filing for injunctive relief," she said, "and we're submitting a formal complaint to the Housing Commission. You've violated multiple statutes, including abuse of authority and misappropriation of HOA funds." Brenda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. One of the board members, a wiry guy named Martin, cleared his throat. "I think it's time for a vote of no confidence," he said. "Effective immediately." The crowd cheered. Brenda's face went red as lava. She turned and stormed off, nearly tripping on the curb. By Friday, she'd resigned, but it wasn't over yet. the county opened an investigation into the HOA's finances. Turns out Brenda had funneled over $20,000 into administrative expenses, including catered board meetings, custom stationery, and a subscription to a luxury landscaping magazine that nobody else had ever seen. The new interim board sent out a community-wide apology letter and eliminated over a dozen bogus fines that had been levied in the past year alone. As for me, my parking spot's still mine. And now it's got a motion sensor light, a mounted camera, and a small painted sign that reads, "Castle Parking. Royalty not welcome." The dust hadn't even had time to settle before the real scandal broke. It was the following Monday, and I was standing in my front yard with Walter, helping him dig out some old sprinkler lines that he claimed were installed by drunk contractors back in the 80s. We were halfway through prying up a rusted pipe when his granddaughter, Kelsey, pulled up in her little electric car looking like she'd just seen a ghost. "You guys might want to check the county clerk's portal," she said, breathless. "Brenda's name is on a lien for 3 properties in the neighborhood, including the Johnson's place." Walter dropped his shovel. "She what?" Kelsey held up her tablet. "Filed under the HOA's name, but the signature block has her initials. And there's no record of those properties ever being in violation of anything. No hearings, no votes, just surprise liens." I wiped the dirt off my hands and leaned in. Sure enough, there they were, 3 separate lien filings, all within the last 2 months, all notarized under Brenda's authority, and all without any attached documentation of fines or notices. Kelsey tapped the screen again. "This is beyond shady. I've interned for a property attorney. You can't just place liens without due process. That's fraud." Walter was already pulling his flip phone out of his overalls. Time to call in the cavalry. Within hours, word had spread like jet fuel. By sundown, a dozen neighbors had gathered in Janet's garage, which had become the unofficial war room. She wheeled out a dry erase board, and Kelsey started listing addresses and dates. Every new discovery made the room colder. One of the homeowners, Mr. Patel, looked like he'd swallowed a brick. "I thought it was a clerical error. I paid the lien just to avoid trouble. $7,000. Janet turned red. "That's extortion," Kelsey nodded. "And if she filed those through the HOA, then she's implicating the entire board whether they knew or not." Martin, the board member who'd helped push for Brenda's removal, arrived late and looked even more rattled than usual. He carried a battered accordion folder and set it on the table. "I got this from her home office," he said, almost whispering. "She left it behind when she cleared out. I wasn't supposed to have access, but the lock wasn't exactly Fort Knox. Inside were dozens of printed homeowner files, some with handwritten notes in the margins. Things like always late on dues target with landscaping violations, and owns rental property threatened with occupancy limits." Then Walter pulled out a document from the bottom of the stack, holding it up like it was radioactive. It was a letter drafted to a collections agency on HOA letterhead authorizing them to begin proceedings against the Gonzalez family for continued failure to comply with community uniformity standards. But there was no signature, no approval, just Brenda's name typed in bold at the bottom. "She was about to send this," Walter said. "Without a vote, without even telling the board." Kelsey shook her head. "We need to go higher. This isn't just an internal mess anymore." I didn't argue. This wasn't some petty HOA drama. This was theft, fraud, abuse of legal instruments. So we made a plan. The next morning, a delegation of 4 residents, myself, Kelsey, Martin, and Mrs. Dawes, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, walked into the county district attorney's office and requested an audience with the white-collar crimes division. Kelsey had prepared a digital binder with all the documentation. Martin brought the physical files. Mrs. Dawes knew exactly what to say. The intake investigator, a guy named Renner, listened without interrupting for 20 straight minutes. Then he leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and said one sentence: "She's very screwed." He didn't smile. He just asked for copies of the original HOA charter, the full list of board resolutions from the past 2 years, and any financial records we could get our hands on. By Thursday, subpoenas were flying. Turns out Brenda had been funneling HOA funds into a separate bank account registered to a shell landscaping company, one that, according to state records, she owned under her maiden name. The same company that billed the HOA for decorative mulch services every month. The same services no one had ever seen performed. When news of the investigation broke, the community Facebook group exploded. Screenshots of her phony invoices, the lien documents, and even a photo of that ridiculous Lexus boxed in by the now iconic stone wall made the rounds like wildfire. That Sunday, a news van showed up. One of the local stations ran a segment called "When HOAs Go Rogue," and our neighborhood became the poster child. Brenda's face, cropped from one of her own newsletters, was plastered all over the evening broadcast, right next to the headline: "Former HOA President Under Criminal Investigation for Fraud and Misuse of Power." I got calls from 3 nurses I worked with, 2 of whom lived in different developments and had their own HOA nightmares. One of them said, "You just became the folk hero of the suburbs." But I didn't feel like a hero. Not yet, because the Johnsons still had a lien on their house. Mr. Patel was still out $7,000, and half the neighborhood was wondering how deep the rot went. That's when the interim board called for an emergency town hall. It was held in the community center gymnasium, first time that space had been used for something other than yoga or overpriced craft fairs. Every chair was filled. Some people stood in the back. The air buzzed with tension. Martin took the mic first. "We want transparency, all of it. From now on, every board meeting will be open, votes will be public, finances will be published monthly." He stepped aside and Mrs. Dawes stepped up. "Brenda Lott is under active investigation by the district attorney's office. We've submitted every document we could find. If you have anything, emails, notices, fines, bring them to us. We're working with investigators. And we're going to help every household she targeted." Someone from the back shouted, "What about those liens?" "We're already drafting legal petitions to have them invalidated," she said, "and we're pursuing restitution." Then she turned to me. "And Elliot Foster has been instrumental in documenting and exposing this abuse. We owe him." I didn't expect applause, but I got it. Loud and long, more than I was comfortable with. I raised a hand to wave it off, then stepped forward and said, "I didn't do it alone." Turns out when you put enough fed-up neighbors together, you get something stronger than an HOA. You get a community. Someone shouted amen from the second row, someone else laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. The days that followed were busy. The new board announced an audit. Not just of finances, but of every policy Brenda had pushed through without a full vote. Several were tossed immediately. Others were suspended pending review. The liens were challenged in court with help from a pro bono legal firm that Kelsey had contacted. And the best part: the county approved a motion to freeze access to all funds associated with Brenda's shell company. Mr. Patel got his money back within the week. As for Brenda, she was officially charged with 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of filing false legal instruments, and 1 count of misappropriation of community funds. She was arrested at her sister's house 2 towns over, where she'd been laying low. The mugshot made the rounds online, hair unbrushed, expression sour, holding a sign she never thought she'd see. Martin dropped off a copy of the HOA's new mission statement on my porch the following Tuesday. It was short, just 12 words. No board member is above the rules. No homeowner is beneath them. And right beneath that, in smaller print, effective immediately, parking violations on deeded property are the homeowner's concern only. I framed it and hung it in the garage. Right above the bag of cement, I never had to use again. By the end of the month, Brenda's name had become shorthand for every power-tripping HOA nightmare in the county. Local podcast hosts were dissecting her downfall like it was a true crime miniseries, and I heard someone in the grocery store mutter, "Don't go full Brenda," when another customer cut in line. But while the community had regained some balance, the legal firestorm still crackled beneath the surface. The damage she'd done ran deeper than anyone realized at first. One afternoon, I ran into Kelsey outside the community center. She had a messenger bag slung across her shoulder and a stack of file folders under one arm. Her brow was furrowed, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "I just got back from the records office," she said, flipping open one of the folders. "There are discrepancies in the HOA's insurance policies. Brenda added coverage clauses to protect herself from litigation retroactively." My stomach tightened. "She insured herself against getting sued," she tried, Kelsey said. "But here's where it gets worse. She used HOA funds to pay a private firm for those policies. And the firm, it's not real. It's a P.O. box registered to someone named Earl Lott. Family, her father," she said. "Dead since 2009. I blinked. "She created a ghost company using her dead father's name," Kelsey nodded. "It looks like she was trying to launder funds through fake premiums. She listed the payments as liability buffering, whatever that means." I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "You think the DA knows about this?" "They do now," she said, sliding a flash drive into her pocket. "I sent them everything." The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the HOA office parking lot. I watched from my front porch as 3 investigators in suits entered the building with a warrant in hand. They left with 2 computers, 4 boxes of paper files, and 1 very pale administrative assistant who looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Later that week, I got a call from Mrs. Dawes. "She's facing additional charges," she said. "Wire fraud, forgery, and filing false insurance claims. The DA's office traced over $30,000 through that fake liability firm." "Unbelievable," I said. "Believe it," she said. "And there's more. She tried to claim reimbursement for emergency structural repair on her driveway, the one she tore up dragging her car out." I nearly choked. "She tried to get the HOA to pay for the damage she caused trying to escape the wall, filed it as a storm-related incident," she said. "Backdated the form to match a thunderstorm from last spring." That night, a special community meeting was held in the gym where the walls still bore faint marks from the last town hall. This time, the agenda was clear: finalizing reforms, permanently closing every loophole Brenda had exploited, and voting on a new permanent board. Martin stood at the podium, hands clasped behind his back, posture stiff with purpose. "As of today," he said, "we've completed a third-party audit of the HOA's finances. Every fraudulent invoice, every unauthorized expense, every misused cent has been accounted for. Funds have been frozen and restitution is in motion." He stepped aside and Kelsey took the mic. "We've overhauled the bylaws," she said. "From now on, no fines over $50 without a board hearing, no liens without third-party review, and no board member can serve more than 2 terms unless approved by a community-wide vote." She paused, then held up a large binder. "This is the new Homeowner Rights Handbook. Every resident will receive a copy. If anything changes, you'll be notified with 2 weeks' notice, and changes require a 75% vote." Janet raised her hand from the front row. "What about the people who paid fines that were bogus?" Kelsey nodded. "We're issuing reimbursements. Even if the money's gone, we'll credit their dues or offer payment plans. No one's getting left behind." Applause followed, but it wasn't the thunderous kind from before. It was steadier, more grounded. People weren't just relieved anymore, they were invested. A ballot was passed around, and by the end of the night, a new 5-member board was elected. No one ran unopposed. Every candidate stood up, answered questions, and promised transparency. It felt less like politics and more like rebuilding a house after a fire. As the crowd dispersed, Martin approached me near the back wall. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You stood up when it counted," he chuckled. "Still. If you ever need help with anything stone wall construction, HOA bylaws, or just moving furniture, I'm your guy." I shook his hand. "I'll hold you to that." The next morning, I found a manila envelope on my porch. No name, no note, just a USB drive inside. I plugged it into my laptop and found a single folder labeled Brenda Private. Inside were dozens of voice memos, recordings of her threatening other board members, mocking residents, even bragging about how she could park wherever she wanted because no one would dare stop her. I forwarded the files to the DA's office. 2 days later, she was denied bail. The trial came 6 months later. It didn't last long. The evidence was overwhelming. Between the misused funds, the forged signatures, the fake insurance firm, and the illegal liens. Her defense team barely made it past opening statements before entering a plea deal. She was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with mandatory restitution and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. The day she was sentenced, I came home from work to find a small package on my porch. No name again, but this time there was a note inside. "Thanks for building the wall. You started something we didn't know we needed. Your neighbors." Inside was a miniature sculpture of the wall I'd built hand-carved stone, just tall enough to fit in the palm of my hand. On the base, someone had etched, "Castle Parking." Justice served. I kept it on my mantle. Spring came early that year. The community started to look different, not just the trimmed hedges and repainted fences, but in the way people talked to each other. More cookouts, fewer passive-aggressive notes. Kids started biking without getting told their wheels were too loud, and every board meeting ended with a cue and instead of a fine chart. Walter took up metal detecting again. Kelsey got recruited by a local law firm. And I went back to working my shifts without wondering what new nonsense would be taped to my door when I got home. Sometimes I'd stand on my porch in the evening, coffee in hand, and watch the sun set over the quiet streets. My parking spot always empty when I needed it. The stone wall long dismantled, but never forgotten, and if a certain silver Lexus ever showed up again, well, let's just say the cement bags were still in the garage, just in case.